I'm going to begin each of these sessions with a quote from Lahiri Mahasaya, Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda. And the majority of this talk is going to be based extensively on quotes from Roy Eugene Davis, my Kriya Yoga teacher and direct student of Paramahansa Yogananda. So the quote I want to begin with is from Lahiri Mahasaya. Lahiri wrote, "When the waves or the changes of awareness are transcended by meditation practice, consciousness is purified and oneness with the Supreme Self is realized. The phenomenal world, the truth seeker's awareness, and Supreme Consciousness are experienced as one." This is one of the primary reasons that people begin practicing Kriya Yoga meditation. And in this series, I want to focus on understanding why it's important to practice Kriya Yoga and essentially what you need to know, what you need to avoid related to your spiritual path so that you make the most obvious progress you can in this lifetime, as well as what is supportive of you, what you can do, the activities that you can engage in to help you with the Kriya Yoga process, with your awakening process. And this is going to be a 4-series talk. Now, I'm entitling this a crash course in Kriya Yoga. That's a little hard to do in a short amount of time, but as I've said in numerous other talks, you have plenty of resources available to learn Kriya Yoga and to get yourself centered on the path. For example, in this YouTube channel alone, youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online, if you go to the playlist tab, you will find a complete recording of a retreat, a stay-at-home retreat. I believe it's over 10 hours worth of recordings where we discuss not only what it means to practice Kriya Yoga, but also the Kriya Yoga techniques, meditation processes, supportive lifestyle, and so on. You also have access to numerous books on Kriya Yoga. Several of the books I have written at this point in time contain just about everything that I found important along the way. Kriya Yoga, Continuing the Lineage of Enlightenment, that's one book. It's got a commentary on the Yoga Sutras, which is very important for any Kriya Yoga practitioner. Kriya Yoga Vichara, another important book which contains numerous processes in the Kriya Yoga tradition. And also a more basic fundamental text, which I think contains most of what you need to know. A Course in Tranquility, another book I have written. Roy Eugene Davis has written several books. Some of the most important ones being 7 Lessons in Conscious Living, and also The Science of Self-Realization, which contains a commentary by Mr. Davis on the Yoga Sutras. The Eternal Way, which is a commentary by Mr. Davis on the Bhagavad Gita. There's enough material in those texts, in these videos, in these talks, that if you learn and apply what's in there, there will be little else that you will need, except for possibly the occasional support from a spiritual mentor or someone a little more experienced along the way to learn from. So this crash course in Kriya Yoga is just a primer, just the beginning to give you an understanding of what it's all about. And then you can start to go through all the videos that are available to you, all the books that are available to you, and start practicing what you learn. I have found over the years that what is more important than simply going away to a retreat and learning a technique and being initiated into a process, what's more important than doing that is actually applying what you know you need to do. And there's plenty of material to give you insights into that. I would prefer people to learn and practice and grow on their own rather than try to find their way into enlightenment by riding on the coattails of someone else, or thinking that by meeting a particular person is going to do it for you. And those of you who've paid attention to this channel know that's been my consistent assertion for numerous years. And with the Kriya Yoga Apprenticeship course, the 2-year Kriya Yoga Apprenticeship course that we do at KriyaYogaOnline.com, it's set up in that same way. It gives people the information, helps guide them on the right path, and then sets them loose to figure it out. So you've got plenty of learning material available to you. And this is just going to be a supplementary, helpful series. At least that's the intention. So I want to begin with a quote from Roy Eugene Davis to get into the meat of all of this. And Roy Eugene Davis wrote, "The Kriya Yoga path is primarily for sincere devotees of God who are committed to constructive, selfless living and concentrated spiritual practice that will result in self and God realization and permanent liberation of consciousness. Insincere persons can, of course, benefit in accord with their aspirations and actions." With this one paragraph, with these 2 sentences, Mr. Davis describes the Kriya Yoga path concisely. The Kriya Yoga path is primarily for sincere devotees of God who are committed to constructive, selfless living and concentrated spiritual practice that will result in self and God realization and permanent liberation of consciousness. Insincere persons can, of course, benefit in accord with their aspirations and actions. So Kriya Yoga is for sincere devotees of God who are committed to the work. And what is that work? It's living constructively, living selflessly. It's concentrating your spiritual practices. And all of these things boil down to not wasting your time in this life, in this incarnation, and not wasting your time in spiritual practice. When you begin practicing, when you think about waking up spiritually, you have to be intensive about it. And it's going to be the same experience in really any endeavor that you have in life. If you want to accomplish something, what do? You find those ways of being, those exercises, those ways of thinking and doing that allow you to be successful in what you want to accomplish. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, again, you can read about the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali in Kriya Yoga, Continuing the Lineage of Enlightenment. You can get Roy Eugene Davis's book, The Science of Self-Realization. There's a 26-hour downloadable course at KriyaYogaOnline.com. In year 2 of the Kriya Yoga Apprenticeship course at KriyaYogaOnline.com, we spend, I would say, 80% of year 2 exploring the Yoga Sutras. And Patanjali starts out by saying in the Yoga Sutras that yoga is essentially the process of ending the fluctuations and changes in one's field of consciousness or one's field of awareness. And that means that essentially you are going to be doing what it takes in your life to calm the mind, to be able to exist in a thought-free state. And when it comes to your daily, everyday life, what does that mean? Well, doing your best to avoid getting involved with overly dramatic situations, overly dramatic people, doing your best to minimize those things which overly stimulate your mind. Now, if you want to be involved in the world and explore the illusion and the Maya of it all, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you are saying that you are sincere on your spiritual path and you're practicing Kriya Yoga, well then, that means that you're learning to cut these things out. Cutting out foods which give you indigestion or make you anxious or make you lethargic. Step number 1. Learning to focus on relationships, people, and situations which are supportive of you in your endeavors. That's number 2. Number 3, learning to give your full attention to your chosen meditation techniques, knowing that it's going to be a process, it's going to be work, meaning that you may sit down, and like me, the first time I tried to meditate, all I could do was simply sit and stare at a candle flame for 7 minutes. That's all I could do, and I was just forcing myself to sit there and do that. My late wife, Melissa, who was also a profound Kriya Yoga meditation teacher, she describes in her book how when she first learned meditation, she was saying for longer periods of time, sometimes 30 to 40 minutes, and this was at a alternative health course at West Virginia University, she got to a point where she just simply had to force herself to sit there and sing songs in her head to sit still. Because in the very beginning, that's part of the whole process, is learning to sit still and be still within. And you have to give your full attention to your meditation technique. If it's a candle flame, if it's breathing, then when thoughts or distractions come in, what do? You do whatever you have to in your mind to say, I'm not paying attention to that. I'm focusing on the breath. I'm focusing on the candle flame. I'm focusing on the mantra. That helps to bring your mind into balance, and that helps to give you the capacity to pay attention to what is important. That way, when you get further along in your contemplative process, your spiritual process, once you're internalized and still, now you can focus on your concept of God and the divine and explore that. Focus on your concept of supreme infinite consciousness and explore that, because now you have the capacity to hold your awareness there until realization dawns. Step number 4 in this way of looking at things is reading helpful, useful spiritual material, which keeps you on track, which inspires you to keep walking forward. And you want to be careful here, because you're not simply trying to constantly be a cheerleader for yourself. That's not why you're reading these things. You don't want to find a book and you hope that that book is always going to give you just the right thing to move forward, because sometimes when you're studying spiritual literature, what you read is something that you might not necessarily want to engage in it. For example, in one text, a discussion between the sage Vasista and Rama, Vasista's student, Vasista says that as long as unregulated mental processes dominate awareness, suffering does not cease. When the fluctuations and changes that occur in the restless mind cease, perceptions of otherness vanish. So within that text, it's giving you insights into the fact that you have to regulate your mental processes. And when you're anxious, or when you're depressed, or when you're angry, or when you're disturbed, for many people, they don't want to do that, or they don't know how to do that. And you have to find a way to make yourself do it. And I use this example over and over again because playing music is very persistent in my life. When you learn a musical instrument, you have to force yourself to go somewhere where no one's going to distract you. You have to force yourself to learn the scales, to learn the tones, the intervals. It's boring, but that is what allows you to play that instrument well. So by learning to regulate your mental processes, that's going to give you a greater capacity to internalize your awareness. It's going to give you a greater capacity to be able to focus on supreme consciousness, the divine, when you're meant to do that, when you can. And again, that requires practice within meditation. But some spiritual texts, while you want to read the ones that keep you on track and are inspirational for you, you also want to be aware of the fact that within those texts, there's also guidance about what you need to do. And sometimes you have to force yourself to do that even when you don't want to, if you are truly going to have the experience of self and God realization, as Roy Eugene Davis, Paramahansa Yogananda, Sri Yukteswar, Lahiri Messiah, as they describe it. It's very easy for us to say that Yogananda was special, or that Mr. Davis was special, or that Sri Yukteswar was special. But in a way, that can be a function of self-sabotaging, because if you put someone else up on a pedestal and you don't think you can ever achieve that, or you're going to maintain those thoughts which prevent you from realizing that they did the hard work too. They chose to do the work required to wake up. So when we think about these four things, those are going to be a prime foundation for giving you the right information, the right tools, the right capacity to experience what Mr. Davis describes as self and God realization and permanent liberation of consciousness. He goes on to say that insincere persons can, of course, benefit in accord with their aspirations and actions. Having been involved in this work for 20 years now, teaching meditation courses online, in person, going to meditation groups, speaking with individuals, there are plenty of people out there, and you probably know them, who have an interest in meditation, and their interest is for health reasons or for greater peace of mind. And their goal is not necessarily for self and God realization. And so it's perfectly fine for them to simply meditate for 20 minutes a day, or go to retreats occasionally every now and then. And they'll get the benefits. They'll get a stronger immune system. They'll get greater sense of optimism. They'll enjoy life a little bit better. So insincerity in this context isn't necessarily meaning you're doing it wrong. It's more of an idea and understanding of the level of possibly intensity. If you really want to focus on permanent liberation of consciousness, and we're going to get into this as we proceed through this series, what that means, what can get in the way, how you can be supported in that regard. You got to go beyond just those basic thoughts that, I'll read a little bit of, Center for Spiritual Awareness's Truth Journal. I'll read a little bit of the Bhagavad Gita, and I'll meditate for a couple hours every day. But as I go through my life, I'll maintain my normal human consciousness so I fit in. The Kriya Yoga path is not about fitting in. Of course, it's not about dramatizing how different you are. No one should really know what you're up to inside. But sometimes we have to make choices that our family and our society doesn't quite understand, because since we're approaching life from a little bit different viewpoint. And you'll find that in numerous spiritual traditions. So it's not just Kriya Yoga. Many spiritual traditions say that, if you're intent upon knowing God, divine consciousness, supreme consciousness, you really have to do what it takes. And normal human consciousness doesn't really care about that. They're concerned about money. They're concerned about sex. They're concerned about status. They're concerned about family, societal obligations. And it is part of our duty to play our role with those things, because we do have a personality and a body and a life path that we're working through. So we have to be able to play that role without attachment. That's really what it boils down to. Playing that role without attachment, and then doing our own internal work to know, number one, what is my role? However simple or complex or mundane or fantastic it may be, what is our role within this temporal world so we can serve that purpose? And then while we are serving that role, are we able to withdraw our awareness, withdraw our senses to know the truth of our eternal nature, which transcends that role? That is the ultimate difference between someone who's fully awake, someone who's not awake at all, and someone who is partially awake. The fully awake person sees supreme consciousness, the divine, in all circumstances and situations, and plays that role without attachment. But they also have the capacity to turn within and experience their eternal, infinite, timeless, omniscient, omnipotent nature and abide there. The individual who's not awake at all has no concept of that. They often have difficulty in understanding what their role is, or trusting that they're playing their role, because you can't help but play your role. So don't worry too much about that. And then the partially awake person They have glimpses and understanding of what their eternal self is, but it's as if they're trying to escape this this temporal experience, as though it is not a part of the infinite. And again, that's a fine place to be, but we're looking for complete liberation of consciousness. So we'll conclude this portion with repeating the quote from Mr. Davis and also that quote from Lahiri Mahasaya. So Mr. Davis, he wrote, "The Kriya Yoga path is primarily for sincere devotees of God who are committed to constructive, selfless living and concentrated spiritual practice that will result in self and God realization and permanent liberation of consciousness. Insincere persons can, of course, benefit in accord with their aspirations and actions." Lahiri Mahasaya. When the waves or changes of awareness are transcended by meditation practice, consciousness is purified and oneness with the Supreme Self is realized. The phenomenal world, the truth seeker's awareness, and supreme consciousness are experienced as one.